Okay, good morning, everybody. I'm Naval Einerich, chair of the APC committee of the Concord Transportation Authority, and we're calling the APC meeting to order here at 8:30 a.m. And Christina, will you please play our short video?
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live-streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should remute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the Raise Hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. A 30-second warning will be provided. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the COVID-19 Special Notice for Public Comment Guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Great, Christina, thank you for that. And now, would you like to call the roll, please?
Yes, Chair Arnridge.
Here.
Vice Chair Nowak.
Here.
Member Butt.
Here.
Member Geringer.
Here.
And Member Thorpe. Not here, although he will be here. He did say he'd be here. So we have 4 members.
Great, thank you. So the next item on our agenda is for public comment for anything that's not on today's agenda. And because it's not on the agenda, we will not be able to answer any questions on that, but we can take it for further consideration. Christina, do we have any written comments at this point?
No, we don't.
And is there anybody in the audience here today who's participating on Zoom? If you would like to speak under public comment, please raise your hand and we'll call on you.
I do not see any hands raised.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And this will take us to our next item, which is our consent calendar. And first, is there any comments or changes on the consent calendar from either board or the public? Seeing none, is there a motion?
I'll move the item. Nowak.
Geringer, second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further comments? Seeing none, Christina, will you please call the roll?
Yes. Chair Arnridge.
Yes.
Vice Chair Nowak.
Yes.
Member Butt.
Yes.
Member Geringer.
Yes.
And Member Thorpe. With the members present, this passes.
Great, thank you. Okay, and this takes us to our regular agenda items, which this is item number 4. And this will be a legislative update. And if there is any action, we will take a vote. Otherwise, this is for information. And Lindsay, you're going to start us off.
Yes.
Welcome.
Good morning, commissioners. There is a lot happening both in Sacramento and at the federal level. So I think maybe this morning we'll start with Mark Watts, our state advocate, and he can let you know what's happening in Sacramento.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good morning, Chair Arnridge and commissioners. I'm happy to be here today to present a brief overview as we near the end of the legislative session. Just as a reminder of where we stand at this point in time, there's 1 week left, essentially, September 10th being the last day for the legislative session and for the legislature to pass bills of the normal type of bills. As a reminder, we have an election on the 14th, and then the governor would have until the 10th of October to dispense with bills that are passed and in his possession on September 10th. So this is a real tight time of the year. This is where all the maneuvering starts to really come into sharp focus. I will just describe briefly where we are in the budget process. As you know, we've had an evolutionary budget that started off back in January, went through the May revise, and we've had several series of major budget amendments since then. And we're still looking at potential more budget action as we near the end of the session. The Assembly Budget Committee was scheduled to meet today to do cleanup bills. That's been canceled. They have a hearing now on September 7th, as does the Senate Budget Committee. So next Tuesday will be really a hallmark day in terms of where we stand on the state budget. I thought I'd cover two other items. First is the teleconferencing and virtual meetings for local agencies. I've been tracking this and keeping staff closely abreast of developments. There have been 3 initial bills that have been introduced. One's a 2-year bill, and there are 2 remaining. One applies to cities and counties only in jurisdictions over 250,000. And so I'll leave that alone, but it's out there and it's moving. And finally, the bill that probably is more direct effect or potential benefit or is of interest to the Transportation Authority is AB 361. That bill was amended earlier this week to add an urgency clause. So in the event the governor does approve the bill, if it's sent to him, it would go into effect immediately. So it would have immediate effect in September or early October. That bill allows the continued use of teleconferencing without having to meet all Brown Act. In other words, it provides the same kind of authority that public agencies are operating now for virtual meetings such as we're at today. It does have a requirement that the authority to use it is delegated to an entity, has to be renewed on a monthly 30-day basis, provided that there's a state or local mandate for social distancing. So that's it in a nutshell. And we're watching it very closely. It's ready to be moved out of the Senate and go back to the Assembly for concurrence and to the governor in the next week. So I think that bill's in as good a shape as it can be at this point in time. The major issue that's confronting transportation programs here in Sacramento at this point in time is a remnant of the May revise, where the governor had provided a significant boost in general fund appropriations for transportation programs, close to $3.5 billion, $2.5 billion of which is intended to provide a supplement to the TIRCP program, the Transit and Intercity Rail program, which is of high interest to Lindsay and Tim and myself and the organization. We've been working on this for several months now, and the process anticipating funding is underway. The commission, the State Transportation Commission, and the California State Transportation Agency that administer the TIRCP program are moving ahead with guideline development processes. And it's anticipated, should everything hold steady, that we would have a call for projects in late December with awards early the next year. However, that's not all the story. This general fund augmentation was provided by the governor, and the governor's intent was to have an entire package that included $4.2 billion from the High-Speed Rail Bond Act appropriated to complete the initial operating segment in the Central Valley. There's been a disagreement between leaders of the Assembly and the governor, And the governor has reiterated that if the high-speed rail appropriation from the bond funds is not provided, he would not accept any legislation that allowed the continuation of the general fund appropriation for the TIRCP and other programs. So it's in a dead heat right now, hoping it works itself out. Various transportation agencies and MPOs and RTPAs throughout the state have offered support for the entire package to ensure that we get the opportunity to have that general fund augmentation. But there's also an upswell of proposals emerging that are significant port projects in the $500 million range. So we don't know how those will play into this final end game. So we're watching it very closely, and I'm in touch with the governor's office on a daily basis to see what assistance they may need. So that is a little bit of excitement for the transportation agencies in the state. So with that, I would draw my presentation to a close at this point in time. If there's questions, I'd be happy to answer them, and there's no request for action at this point in time.
Great, Mark, thank you for that. Any questions of Mark on our state? Seeing none. Mark, it sounds like it's a typical hostage. Yeah, Tom, go ahead.
Mark, what bill was that, the last one you talked about for?
I'm sorry, that is AB 361 Rivas. And that one applies to all public, local public agencies, as opposed to the other bill, which only was limited to certain cities and counties.
And that's the only thing floating around out there right now that would extend past the governor's end of September cutoff.
Correct, and that's why it's got urgency clause added to it. So,
okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Any other questions of Mark? Mark, thank you. And by the way, you had a perfect connection today.
Thank you.
Just wanted to
thank you. We strive to get there.
That's great. Okay, Lindsay, back to you. And I think we have Gus Maples here on our federal side.
Yes, Gus and Jason are both here this morning, and I know they've got a lot to update us on as well. So take it away, guys.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Like Lindsay said, we do have a lot of updates since our last meeting. So I want to sort of start with a recap of the House action. On July 1st, the House did pass the Invest in America Act, which is the House Democrats' version of a $715 billion 5-year reauthorization of the FAST Act and water infrastructure programs. Noteworthy in that bill, it did include member designated projects, which are otherwise known as earmarks. CCTA was successful in working with Congressman DeSaulnier and McNerney to secure funding for several local initiatives, including the smart signals upgrades to relieve congestion along 680. The Senate, however, was working on an entirely separate track for their own infrastructure bill, which is called the Infrastructure Investments and Jobs Act. This also reauthorizes the FAST Act programs and includes a little over $500 billion in new spending for electric vehicle infrastructure and supplemental funding for a bunch of discretionary competitive grant programs. California stands to get approximately an $850 million increase above current highway level funding in the first year of the bill. It authorizes $2.5 billion from the Highway Trust Fund over the 5 years of the bill to create a new competitive grant program that will build out alternative fuel corridors along the national highway system and EV charging infrastructure. It also appropriates $5 billion for a brand new electric vehicle formula program to work with states to develop long-term plans to build out their EV charging infrastructure as more vehicles move to that method of fueling. This is obviously a massive and unprecedented investment in that, so it will take DOT a little bit of time to set up the program. A few tweaks to existing programs. It does make EV charging eligible as a funding source through the Surface Transportation Block Grant Program and allows for the purchase of zero emission vehicles in the CMAQ program. It also authorizes $106 billion for public transit programs over the life of the bill. This is roughly a 60% increase above current levels and is the largest federal investment in public transit in history. It includes about $8 billion for Section 5309 capital investment grants and $5.25 billion for the low or no emission bus competitive grants. FTA will only consider non-zero emission vehicle applicants for 25% of this funding. So there will be a heavy emphasis on zero emission vehicles. The only real downside in the Senate bill outside of these unprecedented investments is a lack of earmarks. The only organization in the Senate that's considering earmarked legislation is the Senate Appropriations Committee. However, in the appropriations process, Congressman DeSaulnier was also successful in securing a $1.2 million earmark for smart signals in Concord in the House Transportation Appropriations bill. The current understanding from the Senate Appropriations Chairman is the House should roughly have their own pot to work with their priorities. So that is at least promising, given that the Senate authorizing bill did not include member designated projects. This obviously gets us to where the FAST Act is set to expire at the end of this month. The House has set up an official rule for them to vote on the Senate bill by September 27th. Obviously, looming over that vote is the larger $3.5 trillion reconciliation package, which will be passed on a partisan basis. This is a lot of Democratic priorities for housing and health care and tax code changes. The current expectation and state of play is that the House will just take up wholesale the Senate bill without changes. But like I said, the reconciliation process and the size and scope of ultimately that final bill will sort of weigh on the vote in the House for infrastructure as well.
Gus, thank you. Jason, were you going to add anything or anything else you want to share with us?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I generally like to have the smart people do most of the talking, such as Gus. And my wife does all the talking because she's the boss. But just to piggyback on Gus's excellent comments, if I can highlight one thing that I know CCTA under Tim's leadership has been very proactive in doing, and that is there will be this additional substantial infusion for EV charging stations to build that out nationwide. And one item that I think that has been truly kind of a proactive visionary step that Tim and the board has undertaken is to get a plan into motion that will provide a stronger emphasis when US DOT is handing out the funds to states and localities, saying, okay, they want to target folks in states and localities that have a plan. And I think that's one of the prerogatives as part of this new grant program that will infuse billions and billions of additional dollars. So I think CCTA is far ahead of the mark there. And I think one thing to underline, while not nearly as enthusiastic as we were on the whole member designated projects and earmarks, because the Senate bill did not include any in their infrastructure package, I think there were more monies to work with, both in the infrastructure package there, but on the appropriations side, I think we are still in a very, very strong position, despite the fact that there are lower and smaller pots to actually allocate. And frankly, that's due to our fantastic Congressman Mark DeSaulnier, who's done day in, day out a phenomenal job in keeping us at the top of the list for many, many different opportunities. Just one final point, and I will close it out for any additional questions. The Senate Appropriations track, they intend to mark up their package in the committee potentially later this month, the third week of September, maybe slip to fourth week. That may include some level of earmarks. That's a TBD issue, so that's another item we're keeping a close eye on and continue to advocate on behalf of CCTA with our two senators. So thank you. We'll pause here and happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Any questions of Gus or Jason here from committee members? Okay, seeing none. Gentlemen, thank you again. Thanks for your advocacy and for keeping us at the top of the list here and keeping us well informed. Lindsay, anything else you want to add before we wrap up on this?
Actually, I just, Jason and Gus, I do believe that as part of the Senate Appropriations, Senator Padilla also had an ask-in for CCTA as well for a couple million. So fingers crossed that that actually works itself out. So
Great.
with that, I don't have any additional comments unless there are any questions from members.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you guys very much. It's always great to see you and keep up the great work. All right. This will take us to item 4B, and this is State Route 4 Design Alternative Assessment Study. And it's to give us a project update on this. And Hisham is going to lead us off on this. Welcome. Good morning, Hisham.
Actually, me, Stephanie, who.
Oh, Stephanie, sorry. Had it on my list.
No worries. Hisham is coming up. So yeah, no worries at all. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. Stephanie Hu, Director of Project CCTA, and this is an informational item to provide an update, as you mentioned, to provide an update on the Design Alternative Assessment, or DAA, on Highway 4. I'd like to introduce our consultant team, David Williams from Mark Thomas and Ron Ramos from Fear and Pierce, who are here for the presentation this morning. And I'll ask David to share his screen for the slides.
Can you see that okay?
Yes, thank you. Next slide. So I'll provide a quick introduction and overview, and I'll hand it off to the consultant team who will be presenting the details of the study and the findings. Next step, well, next slide. So MTC and CCTA, we partner in this for the study and funding, as well as the scope and the development of our study. The goal was to study, of the study is to identify, screen, evaluate, and prioritize various managed lane concepts for Highway 4 that can be implemented by 2030 and that can address the congestion issues of the corridor, meet the needs, and support the potential long-term improvements of the corridor. The study limits are from the 684 interchange to Hillcrest Avenue. Next slide. In addition to CCTA and MTC staff and our consultant team, a technical advisory committee was formed for this DAA, which included the local jurisdictions along Highway 4, as well as the transit operators and Caltrans. Next slide. Next slide. So this is an overview of our study schedule. We started the study back in the middle of 2020. We convened the TAC group 4 times throughout the course of our study to obtain their feedback and input. We're currently at the tail end of the study and with today's presentation on our findings. And with that, I'll hand it over to David for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. Yeah, the main issue on the SR4 corridor is in the morning, there's a congestion, current congestion and future congestion in the westbound direction. And in the afternoon, we have the opposite direction. We have eastbound congestion that we're seeing. So we, as a group, we developed quite a few concepts. We ultimately come up with 11 managed lane concept. A managed lane could be a HOV lane, express lane, contraflow lane as examples. We put those through a screening process that was discussed and presented to the TAC as well. We ended up with 6 viable alternatives that we did some further study on, looking at the traffic side of things. And we've identified 4 prioritized alternatives that we'll talk about in the next few slides. So the alternatives is adding a second HOV lane along the corridor. So there's existing HOV lanes out there today. So this would add a second one, and it's primarily in 2 distinct areas. It's actually, the second one is converting that existing HOV lane in both directions of SR4 to an express lane. and then adding a second express lane, similar to the second lane that we're adding for that HOV alternative. Both of these alternatives would be 2+ occupancy, which is the existing condition out there on the corridor. We also have identified taking the existing HOV lane and converting that to an express lane, but changing the occupancy from 2+ to 3+. And we also work very closely with the transit agencies in the corridor to identify potential park and ride lots. So I'll just show these in a little bit more detail. This is the first one. This is adding an HOV lane. The HOV lanes in both directions in eastbound would start sort of just west of 680 and go all the way through to Hillcrest. In the eastbound direction, it starts at Hillcrest and it goes just to the west of SR 242. So this would add just a second HOV lane in these distinct areas in the eastbound direction between 242 and Bailey, which is this red line. And in the westbound direction, it would be from Railroad Avenue to just the existing end of the westbound HOV lane. We've estimated a construction cost here. There's a range shown. It's to take into account potential things like escalation, VMT mitigation that may be needed, environmental mitigation as part of construction. But for this alternative, we're looking at about $30 to $36 million in terms of just purely construction costs. This is where we take those HOV lanes and we convert them to an express lane. So the limits of the express lane would be similar. It would start here in the eastbound direction and end at Hillcrest Avenue. And then in the westbound direction, start at Hillcrest and end at just to the west of Willow Pass Road. And then it's once again adding that second express lane. In this case, that express lane in both directions would go to Railroad Avenue. In terms of the cost for this type of alternative goes up because there's a lot more infrastructure, there's a lot more work needs to be done. So the range here is $100 to $135 million. And we're talking purely construction costs here. We also have the added component of a toll system integrator. They're the third-party designers that come in and they populate, make the system go live, put all the readers, cameras, etc. in the system. So for this alternative, it's a $30 to $35 million estimated cost. The third alternative is taking the existing HOV lanes that are out there in each direction and just converting those to express lanes. So they would still be a single lane, a single express lane, but changing the occupancy from 2+ to 3+. So under this scenario, HOV2 would be typically tolled at a reduced rate. And under this scenario, the construction cost is not as much because it's only a single express lane. So we're estimating $65 to $90 million. The toll system integrated costs come down a little bit because now it's just a single express lane. So there's less equipment involved. And then just finally is the park and ride lots. There's existing park and ride lots out there today. The green dots are primarily the ones that indicate the ones that exist in the study corridor. There's planned ones. We're working closely with Tri-Delta Transit. There's planned ones shown by the orange dots. And then we sat down and looked at potential opportunities to add additional park and ride lots that would support any type of managed lane concept along the corridor. It's really, these are opportunities for folks to use these park and ride lots potentially to get to like BART stations, things like that. With that, I'll hand it over to Ron to talk about the traffic.
Thank you, David. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ron Ramos with Firm Peers. I'm going to start talking about the westbound approach on the SR4. The future no-bill conditions will have an average period travel time of near 26 minutes. Moving on to for the general purpose lane, about 21 minutes for the managed lane. The double HOV lane provides us a little bit extra capacity and will motivate most shift into HOV2s to add some vehicles into the managed lane and therefore reduce the congestion in the general purpose lane. The congestion will go down to near 24 minutes, represents about 90% for general purpose lanes. And given the additional capacity in managed lane, the travel time will go down to near free flow conditions and about 16 minutes, which represents a 24% reduction. Moving on to the double HOV lane that now forms as a is working as express lane. These modifications allows us to backfill the express lanes to the capacity of 1,650 vehicles per hour, which allows us to add a few more vehicles to the managed lane, reducing the general purpose lane travel time to near 22 minutes or about 14% decrease, and keeping the managed lane traveling at free flow conditions near 16. Moving on to the single HOV3. For these alternatives, the assumptions behind it vary and could provide different results. Therefore, we analyzed two scenarios which we believe will give a good show of the possibilities. Definitely, there are some limitations on the current study. This need to be considered for future studies. Using a 15% mode shift from general purpose to paying toll users, we will see an increase of travel time for about 19% or about 31 minutes. This is mainly due the HOVs2s were removed from the managed lane and put into the general purpose lane because now they will have to pay a fee reduction that not many will be willing to buy into. In contrast, when we allow more mode shift from general purpose lane to paying tolls, the travel time will go down compared to the 15% by about 2 minutes to 29 minutes, which is about a 10% increase compared to no bill conditions. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at the measure of effectiveness based on hours of delay, what we'll see is that the no bill conditions will have about 3,000 hours of delay. The double HOV2 lane will reduce the delay for about 24%. The double HOV with express lane for 2+ users will reduce the vehicles hour of delay by about 40%. The HOV3 express lane at a 50% mode shift will increase the hours of delay by about 50% in the 15% range for mode shift, and in the 25% will likely increase the hours of delay for about 26%. In terms of people hour of delay, it's a similar scale of increment. It's just a different way of presenting hours of delay. Next slide, please. So now what we are going to cover is the travel times at the hourly level. Basically, the summary has been presented on at the overall morning period, and we just see about some fluctuation on how each alternative will behave, but the conclusions of the morning peak have already been discussed. Next slide. Here we see how the travel time for the managed lane will vary. Most of the alternatives will reduce the travel time on the managed lane to near free flow conditions or about 16 minutes. Now moving into the eastbound, again, we're going to start talking about the average peak period travel time. For the no bill conditions, we have travel time of about 37 minutes. The second HOV with the Bailey auxiliary lane will reduce the travel time for about 40% to near 23 minutes. Converting the HOV lane to an express lane without the Bailey auxiliary lane will actually reduce the travel time to 24 minutes, or a 34% reduction. The single HOV with a 15% mode shift will increase the travel time by 20%, or 44 minutes. The 25% mode shift will increase the delay to 38. Will increase the travel time to 38.4 minutes, which is about 5%. Going to the managed lane travel times, we see that the managed travel times compared to the no bill, they will all get reduced. Next slide. So now talking about vehicle and person hour of delay. For the no bill conditions, we have about 4,300 hours of delay for the no bill conditions. The double HOV2 with the Bailey auxiliary lane basically gets rid of the delay. Moving on to the double HOV plus the express lane. Again, the key here is the auxiliary lane on the Bailey bottleneck. This alternative does not provide that, but the additional capacity, the additional cars shifting into the express lane reduces the hours of delay quite significantly by about 89%. In contrast, the single HOV3 express lane with a 15% mode shift will increase the vehicle hour of delays to near 5,000. I'm sorry, 6,500, which represents a 51%, and the 25% mode shift assumption will increase it to near 5,000, which represents a 16% increase on vehicle hour of delay. Again, the vehicle hour of delay is just a different measure on the magnitude of the decrease or increase will remain the same as a vehicle hours of delay. Next slide. Here we have the eastbound PM peak travel times at an hourly level. We see the fluctuation between the times, but the conclusion of the average afternoon peak have been discussed. Next slide. And here we are presenting the eastbound managed lane travel times, where we see that at the hourly level, all the alternatives will work better than the no bill conditions.
I'll do the next steps. This is the final slide for everyone. So the next steps, as mentioned earlier, the DAA was a brief analysis done with MTC to evaluate whether express lanes are feasible and beneficial for the corridor and see whether there are near-term opportunities for implementation. Staff will continue to coordinate with MTC on next steps and the funding availability. And if funding was available, the next steps to continue developing the managed lane concepts further would be the formal Caltrans project delivery process, which will involve more detailed engineering and traffic analysis with more robust modeling tools. For example, we just saw through the slides here that the double HOV and the double express lane concepts perform operationally better than the single managed lane concept. But since we're in the world of VMT and SB 743, we will need to do a more comprehensive evaluation of VMT and mode shift to really compare the managed lane concepts, such as weighing the operational performances versus VMT impacts and any associated mitigation costs, and also how higher occupancy requirements on managed lanes will affect mode shift. Staff will also continue to coordinate with other studies that are happening on Highway 4. Currently, there's the East County Integrated Transit Study that's going on, and also there will be a travel behavior study that will be underway for the corridor. So with these studies, along with the findings we have for this DAA, will help us shape a vision for Highway 4 with a more corridor-wide approach. And with that, we'll be happy to take any questions or comments that you may have.
Great. Thanks, Stephanie. And also thanks, David and Ron. Can we go back to take this presentation down? Go back to the full screens here. Great. Thank you. Questions from committee members? Tom, and then Sue.
All of the statistics shown had to do with reducing congestion and reducing travel time. Do these also add capacity? Does the throughput of vehicles increase? Or are you working with the same baseline number of vehicles?
The capacity, it is considered capacity enhancing if we're adding a lane. So I don't know, Ron, we have slides about the numbers, but it is more VMT, if that's what you're asking, in terms of capacity increasing.
So I guess one thing I look at, if you're, so you said that, yes, it will increase capacity, right?
Yes.
Yes, because we're adding, yeah, well, on the alternatives that are adding an extra lane, whether it's HOV or express lane.
So one thing I worry about is what the downstream effect is. I mean, you're just analyzing a section of Highway 4, but we've got all kinds. We've got a huge controversy about the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge and the third lane and all that kind of thing. And so, if you increase capacity on Highway 4, I have to ask myself, how many of those people are going to be heading for Marin County and they're going to use the San Rafael Bridge and they're going to increase capacity? I mean, they're going to increase use of that. And so I'm not really asking a question. I'm just concerned that the impact of these programs is not looked at on a wide enough area. So you may be increasing capacity on Highway 4. You may be ruining somebody's life somewhere else.
680-24, sure.
Yeah, so I have a concern about that. And then I guess the other thing is this study has been taking place since pre-COVID. And what impact do you think that the tendency for remote working is going to have on all your baseline data? Or does it just assume that at some point we're going to go back to normal and everybody who drove to work before is going to go back to driving to work?
Let me just touch on the first question. In terms of what we looked at, it was just a certain corridor-wide look as part of this study to identify viable alternatives that by 2030 could potentially be implemented. The next step in the project delivery phase, if it advances, is to look more regional at those potential impacts as you get more using different types of analysis tools to enable you to look at those wider ranging impacts. And that's what we would typically do on any project. In terms
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, go ahead.
Well, I just, overall, my concern is that it seems like what we should be doing is trying to get as many cars off the road as possible, but instead we're looking at how we can get more cars on the road. So I'm just concerned about that.
Yeah, and we looked very closely with the transit agencies as part of this process. They were part of the TAC to really look beyond just the State Route 4 corridor to look at opportunities that enhance transit as well. We looked at BART opportunities, enhancing BART service, the local bus service as well. So we took more of a global look at this project as part of this study. Because, for example, the park and ride lots that we identified, they could be utilized, they could be built independently of anything you do on State Route 4, or they could be built to support what you do on the corridor as well. So we made a strong attempt to bring that into the study as well, just not look at the highway improvements. Mm-hmm. In terms of the question you had about COVID, you are correct. The analysis tools that we used were pre-COVID. I believe, Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, it was the 2018 was our baseline existing conditions. But what we have noticed throughout the corridor is that the congestion on State Route 4 has stayed out there. You know, some of the peak periods have elongated. We've noticed that, but we actually commented a lot during the actual study with Stephanie that, you know, observations are that there's still a lot of people out there using the corridor. It initially dipped early last year, but it's built back up again. So it's still quite significant in terms of the congestion that's out there.
But just to add on that, David, I think that when you look at that, you also have to look at BART. Right now, BART's empty, right? Yeah. So they're still only around 90%. So I happen to have folks that I know that live out there that work in San Francisco who are driving their cars, and they've never driven their cars because they can do it. They feel safer, a whole long list of stuff. So I think what Tom was suggesting, I think all of our projections, you know, we have tried using freeway systems to deal with congestion, which is truthfully what this is doing. But in terms of reducing traffic, freeways don't reduce traffic. Public transit and those things do, and we have contributed to those. Absent that, the only way we're going to get people to not use cars is the COVID effect. And the COVID effect is long term, there's 25 to 40% of the people who will remain at home for at least 60 to 70% of their normal working times. So it's too early, I think, is what I'm hearing, is it's too early to start to account for that in our transportation scenarios. But at some point in time, we will, as that sorts itself out probably in the next 18 months or so. Does that seem like a fair assumption?
No, I think that's fair. I think that's, you know, statewide, regional, state level. We're going to see that on all the different projects. We, you know, in talking with Tri-Delta Transit, they had a significant drop in ridership just in the local level. As part of this study, we're also looking at opportunities to promote express bus service as well. There is some express buses out there. They actually, the number of those rides available actually dropped because of COVID, because they weren't seeing the ridership. Hopefully that will come back, and actually there'll be more opportunities to increase express bus service as well. So you are correct. We're still in this area now where we're trying to evaluate the impacts of COVID and how moving forward, how that's going to sort of affect transportation projects, you know, in the future.
Right. Okay. Thanks, David. Sue, did you have a question?
Yeah, I did. So in the studies, it looked like the HOV +3 made things a whole lot worse. So is that because fewer people use the +3 and therefore you've got more congestion on the regular lanes? Is that why what that impact is?
I can take that question. Yes, the short answer will be we are removing a lot of HOV2 vehicles from the managed lane and putting them in the general purpose lane. Now, one thing we need to consider is that express lane is going to be used, someone is be willing to pay the fee once the congestion is present, right? So when we remove HOV2s, we are removing them from all the hours, even when there were not so much in congestion. So for order of the express lane users to start paying the fee, the congestion needs to form, and they'd be willing to pay the fee while the congestion is present. This is one of the reasons that sometimes it's not very intuitive, which why will increase delay.
Okay.
And also, we're not adding a lane. The other scenarios add a lane. So that's what Tom is pointing out. Adding a lane, I don't care what you use it for.
Yeah.
It adds capacity.
Right.
Yeah.
So then the sort of the follow-up is the HOV +2 and HOV +2 with express lane. There doesn't seem to be that significant of a difference between the two, yet we have quite a significant difference in cost. Right. And so I'm more making a statement here is that to me, unless there is a significant difference in cost, significant difference in delay, that additional cost seems to be not worth adding that express lane. So that was just an observation more than a question.
Yeah,
You are correct. Just the infrastructure associated with an express lane, the overhead signage, the communication, electrical infrastructure, cameras, readers, all that does add to the cost of the project.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. What may have not come out in the presentation is on eastbound direction, adding an auxiliary lane at the eastbound on-ramp from Bailey Road has a dramatic improvement to congestion in the eastbound direction. So that was something we discovered during the study. So if that is coupled in the eastbound direction, if that's coupled with the second HOV lane in the eastbound direction, that I think there was that one graphic that the delay and the reduces significantly, and it's mainly due to that Ox lane improvement at Bailey.
Yeah, good point, David. We've seen that on the 680 corridor and portions of the 24. They have the auxiliary lanes have really improved the congestion. It's made the weaving safer, and it's helped the local traffic move as well. So,
yep.
Great. Okay, Sue, any other questions of Commissioner? Any questions from anybody in our audience here today? Christina, do you see any? If so, raise your hand.
See no hands raised.
Okay, great. All right, well, great. Well, thank you so much, Stephanie. Anything you want to add to this? Okay, well, great. Thank you for the presentation to Ron and David. Well done. Fascinating to see it. Obviously, the solution by adding that does create vehicle miles travel. The mitigation, just to be honest, could be huge. While we are solving one problem, according to what the state wants us to do, we're doing the opposite of. So, but we also have to count that with all the housing units we're supposed to be building, more people are going to be in those areas. So while it does create more vehicle miles traveled, but you have to balance that with a number of new people that are being accounted for as well. So, all right, thank you. So this will take us to our next item, which is item 4C, and this is the 2022 State Transportation Improvement Program, or what we always use as our acronym STIP. And this one, I think Hisham is actually going to present. Hisham?
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I do have a presentation for this item. I hope you can see it. Okay. My name is Hisham Noemi. I'm the Director of Programming. This is an action item. Every 2 years, the CTC, the California Transportation Commission, adopts a new STIP. And in doing that, they add 2 years to the STIP cycle. In this case, the 2022 STIP will add funding fiscal year 26 and 27. And as you can see in the slide, in the current STIP, the 2020 STIP, there is funding for projects like I-80 Central Enrichment, the first 2 phases of Highway 4 operational improvements, which will add auxiliary lanes, as well as funding for the Iron Horse Trail overcrossing at Bollinger and Treat Boulevard in the county. Today, I will be talking about the process we undertook to select projects, the STIP fund estimate, and the staff recommendations. We presented this item to TCC back in July, and they concurred with the staff recommendations. The funding allocation policy, which you adopted in April of this year, laid out the process that we follow to program new fund sources. The board back in May 2020 suspended Measure J appropriations to the remaining projects in the strategic plan, as well as the TLC and PID-BIC programming document. At the time, nobody knew how bad things could get with COVID, how long the COVID lockdowns will last. So we were trying to reduce our expenditures until we get a clear idea of what's going to happen. At that same meeting, the board directed staff to prioritize future Measure J appropriations by developing the allocation plan. After working with the TCC and the Regional Transportation Planning Committees over the next several months, the board approved the allocation plan in February 2021. The plan basically ranked the remaining 32 locally sponsored projects in the strategic plan and the bid and buy programming document. It also looked at all of the 11 authority managed projects that we're working on. And at that same meeting in February, you authorized us basically to resume appropriations of Measure J funds only to the top 14 projects out of the 32 projects. The reason you did that is you wanted to make sure we don't lose the $54 million in other fund sources that the sponsors secured for their projects. So as things stand at this time, there are 18 projects in the allocation plan that you have not yet authorized them to receive their Measure J appropriations. According to the funding allocation policy, projects on the allocation plan that haven't received their Measure J appropriation become the authority's priority to fund from future funding sources, as long as it is determined they're eligible and can meet all the requirements for that fund source. That is what we did when we nominated projects to MTC's Quick Strike program. By doing that, we managed to fund 6 projects on the allocation plan out of the remaining 18 with federal money, saving us about $6.6 million in Measure J funds. The policy also stated that if it is determined that multiple projects on the allocation plan can meet the fund source requirements and there isn't sufficient funding to do all of them, as most likely always the case, the projects will be scored and ranked so we can stay within the funding amount. Only when there is more funding that needed, we will issue a new call for projects. So based on the STIP criteria, we determined 9 projects out of the remaining 13 projects in the allocation plan would be eligible if they chose to apply. So we reached out to the project sponsors to see if they're interested in submitting their projects. For various reasons, we had no takers at this time, Some just didn't want to federalize their projects. STIP funds are federal. Others thought the timing of the STIP funds will not fit with their project schedule. They thought it will delay them because the fund won't be available until fiscal year 26 or 27. And most thought that, given the situation with the economy, they'll most likely still get their Measure J funds. This slide shows the requirements that each project sponsor must meet to get their projects programmed in the STIP. You have to do a project study report, which is basically a determination of the scope and the cost and the schedule. You gotta do NEPA clearance because, as I mentioned, federal STIP funds are federalized, and the request amount has to be over $500,000, basically, to make it worth going through the process. And the phase you're asking the funding for from the STIP has to be fully funded with the request. So we submitted 3 authority projects that were on the allocation plan as candidates for the 2022 STIP. These projects are shown in the slides. They include 684 interchange phase 1 and 2A, the northbound express lane on 680, as well as the I-680 coordinated RAM metering. The total that's requested by these projects is $72 million, which is way higher than what we will get from the STIP. So we had to rank them to figure out which projects rise to the top. This slide shows how they ranked. The order you see is how they ranked. And we picked these projects just based on their ranking in the allocation plan. Both the northbound express lane and the 684 were at the top of the allocation plan. Also, we took into consideration how much money they need, what's available, and how much other funding they may have that will be at risk. This is the criteria that we use to evaluate submitted projects. This is the same criteria we used in the past STIP cycle. And with that, let's talk about how much money is available. For the 2022 STIP, we will have about 23.8 million available after you take into account what we owe MTC and BART for past fund exchanges. These exchanges were necessary to keep projects like the Caldecott as well as the eBART projects on schedule. Basically, the sponsors used different colors of money to keep those projects moving on the promise that they could be replaced with STIP funds. So thinking outside the box, and I have to credit our executive director for this direction, we reached out to MTC to ask if they could loan us some of their STIP share that they have currently unprogrammed for repayment from the 2024 STIP. We basically use their money now, and in the 2024 STIP, they take some that money back. We figured we could put their money into good use if they are not going to need it for a few years. MTC staff indicated their willingness to consider our request, but a final decision is not likely to happen on the $15 million until November of this year. So if they approve it, we will have an additional 16.2 million on top of the 23.8. That brings up the total to $40 million. So taking that into consideration, staff is recommending 3 actions today. The first one is to authorize the programming of 25 million for the I-680 CARM, Coordinated Adaptive Remetering, 972 for planning, programming, and monitoring. And if MTC approves our request to loan us their STIP share, 15 million for the I-680 northbound express lane phase 1, which is part of the Innovate 680 program. We are asking for also your approval to sign, authorize the chair to sign resolution 2138B, indicating support for the 2 projects we're nominating, the I-680 CARM and the northbound 680 express lane. And finally, this is just a precautionary measure. If Caltrans doesn't approve the project study report for the I-680 CARM by November 1st, we are asking your authorization to let us keep that 25 million unprogrammed at this time, so we can amend the STIP later on once the PSR is approved. Hopefully we won't have to do that. The consultant team as well as staff are working very hard to meet that deadline. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions. We wanted to show you here. The green cells basically shows where the funding for the projects will be programmed. At the bottom are the proposed revisions to the STIP. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great. Thank you, Hisham. Maybe you want to take the screen down. There we go. Great. Any questions, committee members? Sue?
Hisham, just on the last point, so that 25 that you're requesting to be retained would be retained until such time as the PSR for the CARM would be approved? Is
Correct.
that okay? All right, that I just wanted to clarify. Too many acronyms in that last line that I couldn't follow. So thank you.
Well done. Great. Any other questions? Okay, seeing none. Any questions from our audience? If so, please raise your hand and we'll call on you.
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay, great. And that was our, that's opening our public hearing on that. We'll close the public hearing on that. Back before us for a motion.
Move the item. Nowak.
Is there a second? Teresa,
you're on mute.
Second. I have to
Thank
have
you.
one of those a day.
Yeah, okay. We all do it. Okay, great. It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Christine, would you call the roll, please?
Yes. Chair Arnrich,
Yes.
Vice Chair Nowak,
Yes.
Member Butt,
Yes.
Member Geringer,
Yes.
and Member Thorpe. The motion passes with members present.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Hisham, for that presentation. We look forward to it. It's always exciting that we are trying to leverage all of our dollars. And I think this shows that. And I think the cooperation, I think what Tim and the rest of the team is doing with MTC, we're showing the value proposition of working together with them and, trying to make things better overall. So thank you to everybody on that. Okay, this will take us now to our item number 4E, and this is our connected vehicle and autonomous vehicle program. And this is the update on our Gomentum station. And Tim, are you going to, or who's going to take us, start us on this one?
Chair Rich, we've got one more item, 4D, which is the update to the strategic plan.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you, gosh. I have a secondary small screen and it's too small. Yeah, I'm sorry. This is item 4D, the 2022 Measure J strategic plan, overall approach and development schedule. And
that will be me as well.
Yeah, Christina, just look at all of the names are wrong on here. So anyway, Hisham, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I've been looking forward to present this item for a while now. We are asking for your approval today to kickstart the process to develop the 2022 Measure J strategic plan. My presentation today will focus on some of the factors that will shape this update as outlined in the staff report. Let me start with just some background information. We are now in year 12 of Measure J since it became effective on April 1st, 2009. We still have about 13 more years to go before it expires. The Measure J expenditure plan guides how we spend our Measure J dollars. It assigns funding to specific projects and programs. And as you can see in this pie chart, 57% of the funding from Measure J goes to programs on an annual basis, like bus operations, paratransit, local street maintenance, and so on, while the remaining 43% pays for capital projects, as well as debt service on issued bonds, as well as program management. The 2022 strategic plan will be the 7th update since the first one you adopted in 2007. The board committed to update the strategic plan every 2 to 3 years to revisit assumptions on revenue growth, debt service costs, as well as cash flow needs. While our focus is on the next 5 years, we keep an eye on what happens at the end of the measure 13 years from now. Our goal here is to ensure that our commitments do not exceed our revenues. Six months after you adopted the 2019 strategic plan, which is what's in effect now, COVID-19 hit. That created a lot of uncertainty on what it will do to the economy as well as our revenues. I'm pleased to say that over the past 3 years, we had $17.6 million more in revenue than what we were projecting in the 2019 Measure J strategic plan. We also were able to restructure our debt, eliminating the swap and replacing our variable interest notes with fixed rate bonds, thanks to the work of our CFO. This is estimated to save us about $5.3 million in interest cost. We have also successfully managed to use the allocation plan, as I mentioned in the prior agenda item, as a tool to fund some of our Measure J projects with other fund sources. That saved us another $6.6 million. And last but not least, the 2 largest construction contracts we awarded recently are now nearing completion. These 2 projects are the 680 southbound HOV Express Lane project and the 684 Phase 3 interchange. Both projects have substantial Measure J funds, as you can see in the slide. we opened the new HOV lane on 680 southbound HOV, southbound 680 in August 2020. And tolling, as you know, just commenced about 2 weeks ago. The other project is 684 Phase 3. We are nearing completion on the construction. We're hoping to finish construction by the fall of this year. By following the four-pronged approach or strategy you see on this slide, we have managed to deliver 2/3 of Measure J projects, and that are included in the strategic plan. They're either constructed or under construction. We haven't even reached the midpoint of the measure. The projects that are completed, they basically put about $2.4 billion in contra costa economy, and they brought us $1.7 billion in other fund sources, non-Measure J funds. Today, we'll be asking your direction on several factors that will shape the 2022 strategic plan. As I mentioned, despite COVID-19, our revenues for the past 3 fiscal years were $17.6 million higher than what we projected in the last strategic plan. The biggest surprise was actually this fiscal year. We just got the numbers just before the mail out of the packet. And for the first time, our annual revenues exceeded $100 million. They were 107. And the revenues grew at the fastest pace ever since we started tracking our sales tax in 1990 with Measure C. The growth rate was about 14.75% when you compare it to the last fiscal year. HDL did our forecast for the 2019 strategic plan. They're a reputable firm who specialize in this type of work. We asked them to update their projections for the 2022 strategic plan. So now I will turn it to Brian to introduce Susie from HDL and talk about their forecast. Let me unshare quickly here.
Thank you, Hisham. I can attest that Hisham has been asking me for probably 6 months, when are we going to get the projections? And in working with HDL, we're finally here. And HDL worked with us in 2019. First of all, can you guys see the screen perfectly?
Yes.
All right. Thank you. And so we have Susie Woodstock from HDL, and Susie used to be a finance director. And as we went through as Hisham was mentioning, you know, we had an additional $12.12 million over our budget. And if we think back over a year, we thought that our revenues was going to be about $76 million because of the pandemic. And Susie will go through and make a number of different changes and show you how we got to where we are today. I remember telling Tim probably a couple months ago, we're going to hit $100 million. And although there's many people out there that through the pandemic have not seen some success, but we have seen some success through the financial pieces for CCTA and the spending habits and different things. And the baseline that we're going to present to you today follows right along with 2019. In the future years, it's going to come up a little shorter than what we had in 2019. But again, we do this every 2 to 3 years. And so we're on the right path in my direction. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Susie Woodstock from HDL, and I will change the slides when she asks me to. Thank you, Susie.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Like Brian said, I'm Susie Woodstock from HDL, and we'll change the slide and get started here.
Brian, go ahead.
Next slide.
Oh, he froze. Oh. Brian, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can. It's trying to. There we go. Sorry.
Okay, so just a little breakdown of the full sales tax in the county. The half-cent transaction tax is right here, but the base rate is 8.75. There are a few other agencies, about 10 agencies in the county that have additional transaction taxes, and so their rates are a little bit higher. The transaction tax is on goods delivered or placed into use in the county, which is different than the Bradley Burns or the State General Fund, the kind of the top accounts that are listed there, where they are place of sale. So we're looking at this half cent, the blue pie slice. Next slide, please. And we're also looking at adjusted. So the state distributes each month and they distribute the cash that they have. So if payments are late or if there's an audit adjustment, they distribute based on cash. Adjusted data is more looking at the sales trend. So it reflects the actual sales for each quarter. So this slide kind of shows that the cash in third quarter might have come up short, even though the sales were higher. And then in fourth quarter, when those late payments come in, the cash looks higher than the actual sales were. So when we're projecting out further, we want to look at the actual sales per quarter. So that's the data that I'm talking about here. Next slide, please. And just a quick summary of the pandemic impact. So looking at 2019, calendar year 2019 as the base year, and calendar year 2020, which of course was the most impacted year from the pandemic. Overall, only down about $2 million, about 2.2%. You can see some of the red negative changes from Autozone Transportation, business and industry, not too much, but restaurants and fuel were the two categories that really were hit hard in the pandemic. The top category, general consumer goods, was up 11% in this year. That has a few reasons, but one of the big reasons is AB 147. And we'll look at that a little bit further when we look closer at general consumer goods. But AB 147 required out-of-state vendors and marketplace facilitators who previously were not reporting online sales to register and start paying California sales tax. So that was perfect timing. The majority of that revenue started in 4Q19, so right before the pandemic, and was bringing in new revenue as things were bottoming out here because of the pandemic. So that helped offset the decline, and that's a lot of the growth that you're seeing there in general consumer goods. Okay, next category. Local tax by region. So this is also looking at the pandemic, calendar year 19 compared to calendar year 20 across the state. You can see not everybody was hit by the pandemic the same way. San Joaquin Valley, the far north regions, and Sacramento region were all positive calendar year over calendar year. But of course, if you look down, there were some areas that were hit, and the Bay Area was hit hardest. San Francisco is in the Bay Area. Of course, it was one of the hardest hit areas without the international tourism, with people not commuting in to work, and with people migrating out and not staying in their rentals because they could work remotely. Overall, the state was down about 4.5%. So the county was only down about 2.2, and the state was down about 4.6. And you can see Bay Area, which of course Contra Costa County is in the Bay Area, Contra Costa did much better than the Bay Area average. Okay, next slide, please. And looking at the Contra Costa tax base. So you can see here, this is for the transaction tax. General consumer goods is the biggest category, the big orange slice there. 32.6% of the revenue is from general consumer goods sales. Autos and transportation is the next biggest pie slice, 18.9%. And then the third biggest pie slice, business and industry. Medical biotech is the biggest category in the business and industry group. And then the other categories, not as big of a slice. So we're just going to look at the three big ones when we're looking at the projections right now. Okay, next slide. So we'll look at the forecast, and we'll start with the biggest category, general consumer goods. So general consumer goods, you can see in 2021 had a big jump up. And this was before we had the final data for the year. So we only had this projection based on 3 quarters, and we were still projecting that last quarter that just came in. It did come in about 2 million higher. So we came in even higher than this number, expecting that some of this was a spike in online shopping because people were home and they had to shelter in place. A lot of people learned how to use the internet or use online shopping. And besides the fact that that new revenue was coming in. So a lot of this growth is multiple reasons, expecting it to flatten out a little bit over the next few years. But then we've been seeing online growth growing at about 6%. So before AB 147, before the pandemic, online growth, online sales were growing at about 6% a year. General consumer goods is not just online. Online is a big portion of it, but of course your brick and mortar stores are another big chunk of this. And those have been flattening out a little bit. So the projection here is a combination of those online sales and the brick and mortar sales. If we go to the next slide, this is a summary of just that AB 147 that it started. The first part was in April of 2019 that any vendor outside of California that sold more than 500,000 into California had to start remitting sales tax and transaction tax. And then the second part, which started in fourth quarter, was any marketplace facilitator. So some of the marketplace facilitators that provide a sale platform for smaller businesses that were below 500,000, if their total business was more than 500,000, they had to start remitting. And this was the bigger portion that generated a lot of the growth in revenue. The next slide, please. The other thing that we saw during the pandemic, the top line is the dip in service. With the shelters in places, the social distancing, we expected to see this. There was a lot of service industries that saw a big dip. But where that spending offset was down here in goods. We saw a big jump in spending in goods, expecting that to kind of taper off as we return to spending on services. But you can see it's tapering off. It's not dipping down kind of to offset as this grows, because we're still seeing a lot of savings and a lot of spending on both sectors. Okay, we can go to the next one. Then we move over to Autozone Transportation. So Autozone Transportation were a classic V-shape during the pandemic. At the beginning, with the shelters in place, saw a big dip, but it really rebounded quickly and prices went up quickly too. So you can see 2021 saw 13% growth in auto sales. This is new and used. This also has leases in it, and it has auto supply stores. It's not, the category is encompassing all of auto type sales, but it's new and used vehicles that have really gone up. The prices have gone up about 15%. They're at an all-time high. More expensive vehicles are the vehicles that are selling. You can see we've got this flattening out. You can see we've got this flattening out for 21-22 as we're starting to see inventory supply be a issue, that the lots can't keep as much car as the demands are pushing for. So for the next couple of years, we're worried about that supply, and that's flattening this out, and then getting back to kind of the normal cycle where people having to replace cars, people looking for more efficient cars, looking for electric vehicles, and that will keep this going strong through the remainder of Measure J. The next one. And the third category, biggest category, was business and industry. Like I said, this is eclectic. The biggest category is medical and biotech, but it has energy and utilities, which is a lot of the solar projects that are being installed in the county. It has electrical equipment, heavy and light industry. It in general is a pretty stable group, and you can see we have it going out with that reflected. It did have some hiccups, very, very small here in the pandemic. Right at the very beginning of the pandemic, some when work was slowing on some of the projects, that slowed the revenue, and then it bounced back, and then we're expecting some fluctuation as we see the comparing to the spike in 2021, and then to have it flatten out at about 3% going forward. The next slide. So overall, looking at the baseline forecast, you can see here's the past actuals, the spike we were projecting for 2021. And then going forward at about 3.3% total. With this heavy spending that we saw here, the previous 2019 forecast considered that a recession was coming. We now have had a recession that's correcting some of these economic forecasts, and we're expecting it now to flatten out a little bit. So that's why the orange line, which is the previous comparison, is a little bit lower than what we were expecting. We did dip down to that, and then we're rebounding up. I've got the highlighted number at 101. That is comparing to the 107 that Hisham was referencing. And you can see that it definitely came in higher than what we're expecting. We do not have that data yet. And again, we're looking at the adjusted. And so the cash can come in with audit adjustments and extra payments. We are expecting that some of the recovery for restaurants might have come in a little bit sooner than we were expecting. And auto sales weren't as affected by the inventory issue that we're seeing. So again, we don't quite have that data yet. And so this number is a little bit lower right now. Going out further, looking at continuous space, you can see that it is a little bit lower than the previous projection. And that has to do with back here, that if we were coming from a recession, we would have growth for that period of time. And this is slowing that down a little bit. Next slide. This is looking at the statewide projection just to compare what the local projection is that we just looked at. And of course, statewide has very fluctuating, as we saw from those statewide pandemic effects. The peak for 1819 was about 7.2, dipped down in 1920, of course, expecting that we'll see the full recovery to pre-pandemic levels. But remember, the full recovery is comparing dollar amounts. And so while not all industries have hit the full recovery, with that AB 147 bringing in new revenue, the total dollar amount is surpassing the pre-pandemic levels in 2021. 21-22, still 9.5% growth. Like I said, not all industries have hit that pre-pandemic level yet, and we're still going to see some recovery going on in 21-22. Going out, we start to get to some normalized growth going forward. You can see both the restaurant and airline industries and hotel industries have said that their recovery will lag behind. Getting the conferences back, getting the business travelers back is going to take a little bit longer. And that's making some of these statewide numbers a little bit stronger than your local numbers. Next slide. And then just a reminder that right now, all of this projection, especially the short term, is assuming that we won't have any COVID-19 restrictions again. We're back to mask wearing, but we're assuming that we will not have capacity limitations, that we will continue moving forward with getting events going. Of course, I think it will slow in the next shorter period of time, but this does not assume that we'll have shelter in place or any of those capacity restrictions like we did in the past. Next slide. And that's it for the projection. I can answer any questions on that.
Thank you, Susie. As always, ACL, you guys have done a great job. Many of us use you for our city's work as well. Any questions of Susie on these projections? Tom, you want to unmute there, Tom? There you go.
Maybe I missed it. But what happens in 2033 or 34 that caused that big downturn?
We go out of business. Tom, that's the end of the Measure J, unless we pass another one.
Well, so were you looking at just revenue for Measure J or revenue or sales tax overall?
So in 2034, the measure ends on March 31st. That's when we stop collecting taxes. So you see 9 months of data in that final fiscal year versus the full 12 months. So that's where the final dip comes from.
Yeah, so eventually it would go all the way down to zero, right?
If you show the FY 35, yes, it would be zero.
Okay, thank you.
We're no longer in business. Yeah. Great. Any other questions? Okay. All right. Back to you, Hisham.
Thank you, sir. Let me share my screen. So So basically, just continuing on my presentation and reiterating what Susie mentioned, this chart shows what our revenues did since Measure J was approved by the voters in 2004. You can see the dips that we took in 2007 and through 2010 because of the Great Recession. And you can also see the dip where we took due to COVID, but also after that, you will see the increase, the 107. The red line is what we projected in the 2019 strategic plan, while the solid line shows the new baseline projection that's proposed by HDL. I also added to the chart the conservative and the optimistic scenarios, so you can see for your reference where that would take us. The difference between the new HDL baseline and the old 2019 Measure J projection is that the new baseline assumes slower growth in the outer years. As Susie mentioned, we're using on average 3.3% in the outer years. However, in the 2019 strategic plan, that was about 4.6%. All three scenarios, as you can see in this chart, shows that we're going to have a decline next year from the 107 number. And then for the next 2 years, both the conservative and the baseline are basically the same. This table shows you the outcome of the various scenarios compared to the revenue projections in the 2019 strategic plan. The new baseline shows we're going to have the same amount of revenues as we assumed in the 2019 strategic plan, which is a total of 2.58 billion over the life of the measure. If we go with the conservative scenario, we will have $73 million less, while the optimistic scenario will shows we're going to have $119 million more. So today, with that information, we are recommending that you adopt the baseline scenario for the development of the 2022 strategic plan, with the understanding that revenues for the next 2 years under the baseline scenario and the conservative forecast are basically the same. We are also, so we're being conservative in the short term, at least in the next 2 years, which is important because in 2 years, we'll be taking another look at our revenue forecast when we update the strategic plan again. So that's the first factor that will shape the strategic plan. The next factor is the allocation plan. You heard me talk about it in the prior strategic plan, in the prior agenda item, excuse me, where I said it saved us about $6.6 million in Measure J. So as you recall, just briefly, in May 2020, you suspended the Measure J appropriations to the remaining projects in the strategic plan. And at the time, nobody knew how bad things could get, so we wanted to reduce our expenditures. And then you authorized us to develop the allocation plan, which we did after working with the TCC and the RTPCs. So the allocation plan, again, is basically, it ranks all the remaining Measure J projects, 32 locally sponsored and 11 authority managed projects. And the goal there is to maximize the return on our investment. At the same meeting, basically, you resumed appropriations to the top 14 projects in order to protect about $54 million in other fund sources. That left us with 18 projects on the allocation plan that have not yet received their authorization to get their Measure J appropriation. And this slide just shows you those top 14 projects that can come in and ask for their appropriations at this time. And this slide, this is all the allocation plan. This slide and the next shows you the projects that have not yet been approved to get their Measure J appropriations. The ones that are highlighted in greens are the ones that we managed to fund from the Quick Strike program, as well as the OBAC savings from MTC. And those are the ones that we managed now to do them basically with other fund sources, saving us the 6.6 million. This is the rest of the list. And what I want to say in this slide is, given that the revenues are, our Measure J revenues for the past 3 years have done much better than what we anticipated in the 2019 strategic plan, we are recommending to lift the suspension on Measure J appropriations for the remaining projects. We need to eliminate any unnecessary delays to these projects and give them certainty about their funding. So if you approve this, we will come back to you in October to revise the resolution that suspended the appropriations. So we will come back at the next meeting in October to do this if you approve to go in that direction. The next factor is the programming window for the strategic plan. We are recommending that you add 2 years to the horizon of the 2022 strategic plan. This will take us out to fiscal year 27 and will basically align the strategic plan with other programming documents that like the 2022 STIP. And quickly, the last factor is the programmatic reserve. In the 2019 strategic plan, the board basically maintained a $2 million reserve to deal with unforeseen cost increases on authority managed projects. We are recommending that you augment that reserve with savings from completed Measure J projects to ensure that we have enough to deal with cost increases or to deal with future declines in our revenues if things don't go the way we are forecasting. If it turns out that we don't need that reserve, you always have the ability to program it to specific projects. But without having such a reserve, basically what you would end up doing is removing funding or eliminating funding from projects that you already committed to, which is not something anyone wants to do. So with that, just quickly in terms of the schedule, we are targeting to complete the 2022 strategic plan. Sorry, I had a typo there, 2022 strategic plan by July 22. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great, Hisham. This is really good news. Your enthusiasm for all the good news here is just overwhelming. I'm teasing. This is really important work for those of you that are new on this. Our strategic plan it's our roadmap. And as Hisham mentioned, it was put on hold for a lot of aspects. So, and rightly so, we took a very, very cautious approach like most of us did in our cities. And the future looks better and our pathway forward is much clearer. So any questions on where we're at on this? This will come back to us at a variety of touch points between now and next July. Any questions? Okay, seeing none. Oh, sorry, Sue.
I was trying to be good and just do the raise the hand feature instead of waving at you. But so do we have an estimate of what the increased reserves would be based on projects today? What kind of number that is? And if we have a ton of savings, do we have a cap as to when we stop increasing reserves and use it for projects?
We haven't completed our analysis, Commissioner, yet, but we'll definitely be coming back to you with the questions you're asking. How much we should put in the reserve versus how much we program. But as an initial step, we should basically finish our analysis, figure out what the savings are, and then come back to you to answer the question, how much needs to be put in reserve versus program.
Okay, so that's going to come back to us if there's.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Good point.
Thank you.
Teresa? No.
Yep.
There you go. Okay, great. All right, I'll open the public hearing. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to speak to us on this item? If so, please raise your hand. Christina, do you see any? And do we have any written comments on anything on this?
No, I have not received any written comments on any of the items, and I see no hands raised.
Okay, great. All right, and I'll close the public hearing, and it's back before the committee for motion.
Seems to be my job today. I will move the item.
Okay.
And I will unmute. I will unmute and second.
Great. Moved by Noack, seconded by Geringer. Thank you for that. Any further comments? Seeing none, we'll close the item and ask for a roll call. Christina?
Yes, Chair Arnrich,
Yes.
Vice Chair Noah,
Yes.
Member Butt,
Yes.
Member Geringer,
Yes.
Member Thorpe. The motion passes unanimously with members present.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, now this will finally take us to the correct order that I skipped. This is to item 4E, and this is for an update. Really exciting opportunity. We have not had an update about Gomentum Station in a long time, and I think Jack Call is going to lead us off on this one. Jack, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Arnrich and committee members. And if Christina Ramos, if you could please share your screen. Thank you. So this morning I'll be giving an update on our activities out at Gomentum Station, along with Matt Alfano. He's the Vice President of Mobility Innovation at AAA. And again, thank you to Christina Ramos with Advanced Mobility Group for running the slide deck. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. So the goals of Gomentum Station, the program, is to reduce congestion, and we feel we can't build our way out of congestion by building more roads, and so new technology might be an option, and that's what we're shooting for. Also, safety, Vision Zero ties in correctly. If cars can't hit vulnerable road users such as bicyclists or pedestrians or other cars, we can get to zero fatalities. Also, in the environment is one of our goals. We want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and alternative fuels is a big goal. And we want to bring jobs to Contra Costa and compete with areas such as Michigan and Arizona. And there's definitely a possibility for that. Thank you. So this is a public-private partnership. We're continuing to build outstanding relationships with the US DOT, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Caltrans, California DMV, MTC, the Air Quality Board, and private partners such as, like for instance, our Smart Signal initiative, and we're working with UC Berkeley, Verizon, in the city of San Jose. Next slide, please. So this is the old Concord Naval Weapons Station, and part of our structure is, so the city of Concord is the base reuse authority with the US Navy. And then CCTA, we have an MOU with the city of Concord and a sub-license with the Navy. And then CCTA, we have a cooperative agreement with AAA. And AAA's vision and their mission aligns with CCTA with a focus on safety and innovation. Next slide, please. So in the summer of 2016, we took delivery of 2 Easy Mile shuttles. They're made in France by Ligier Motors, and that was a very actually tough thing to import those. We were the first to do that in the United States. And then just a quick example of the Easy Mile shuttle. We had issues crossing Camino Ramon in Bishop Ranch, and so we learned a lot. I mean, there was a valley gutter at the driveway, and the vehicle thought it was a wall, and it went very slowly. So then we had to work with the signal to keep it green. And my point there is that the Gomentum Station, we can do this testing in a secure environment before we move it out onto public streets. Next slide, please. So we transitioned to the Ollie shuttle. It's made by Local Motors. It's American made, and that helped us receive 2 grants from the US DOT because of the Made in America or Buy America policies. We first had 2 first-generation Ollies, and now we have 2 Generation 2 Ollie, or 2 Gen 2 Ollies. They're at Gomentum, and we will be deploying them after testing. Next slide, please. So this is one of the grants that we received. It's the Bay Area Mobility on Demand. And basically it's an application that you would use on your phone to get you from your origin to your destination. And it would take you with various different mobility options, and you could pay for your entire trip at one time. And we're working closely with BART on this project. Next slide, please. So this is the Automated Driving System Grant. This is the other project that we well, not that recent, but that we did receive. There were 73 applications for this grant, and there was 8 successful applications. And the other applicants, we were the one, and the other ones were all state DOTs or universities. And I'll just quickly, one is the Rossmore First Mile, Last Mile Shared Autonomous Vehicle Project. It's a retirement facility or 55 plus community, with the average age being around 76 years old. And we're replacing existing transit system with autonomous vehicles. And the Rossmore area is really looking forward to this project. We'll be running the Ollie shuttles there. The next project is the County Hospital Accessibility Transportation Project. The nexus for this project was that patients were missing their appointments, and then they ended up having to go to the ER because they weren't going to their regular scheduled appointment. So we're going to try to offer another option to get you to your appointment. At the same time, there's doing a lot of virtual appointments now. So we're looking at, we're working with the hospital to see how we can really increase, make it more convenient for people that need transportation. And the third project is the personal mobility on Interstate 680. And this project, what we're trying to do too, is because there's not BART down the 680 corridor, we're hoping to increase the throughput on Interstate 680. And we're also working with the town of Danville and Nissan to expand this project. Next slide, please. This is a very exciting project that's going on out at Gomentum Station. And I think we're with, okay, there's no volume on this, so this is the Dynamic Personal Micro Transit. The company's name is Glideways. And this is actually on Park District land at Gomentum Station. And this project, hopefully we can help you get to BART stations. That's mainly out in East County. They have a lot of proposed projects, but this demonstration, this is a proof of concept that they have at Gomentum Station. And what they're trying to do is get the PUC approval. Also, the Park District is highly excited about this project because they want to run it from North Concord BART to their facility here. And you can't add parking to this area because of environmental concerns, but we want people to enjoy the park. So anyone on the BART system could come to North Concord BART and then take this vehicle, and you can also fit wheelchairs or bicycles in it. Next slide, please. So this is some of the improvements that we have done in the past. Mainly, it was related to the CalSTA grant that we received. There was $3.5 million in state funds, and that was matched by AAA with another $3.5 million. We resurfaced 340,000 square feet of pavement, also put in signalized intersections. And this money was fully complete, or this grant was fully completed last year. Next slide, please. This is the Signal Lab, which is very exciting. This is similar to what we did in San Ramon. We did not have the Signal Lab when we were working on that project, and we have it now. And so there's different vendors. So almost every city has a different type of controller. There's different onboard units and vehicles, and you want to make sure that they can communicate accurately. And for one example, pre-pandemic, there was a ITS California conference down in Anaheim. And one of the demonstrations, they put the attendees in a bus, and they had 3 different intersections with 3 different types of controllers and 3 different onboard units. And so as the bus went through the intersections, they had what's called signal, phase, and timing, basically the green, the red, and the amber or yellow. And when they approached the intersections, each signal phase was different from each different vendor. And so the traffic engineer for Anaheim, he goes, one of the things in ITS that we always talk about is we want to make sure when you're going from country to country that your autonomous vehicle can still operate. But then even like state to state, you want to make sure, or city to city. In Anaheim, they couldn't even go from one intersection to another intersection. So that's definitely a problem. And this Signal app has a lot of potential to really kind of work through those issues. Next slide, please. This should be a video, I believe.
Gomentum Station, a private and secure 2,100-acre proving ground for connected and automated vehicles, conveniently located in Concord, California, 35 miles from San Francisco. We're the nation's largest closed-course AV test track with various environments for repeatable, automated vehicle testing. Engineers from OEMs and AV tech startups use our facility as an integral part of their development process to validate simulator results, perform safety operator training, and test NCAP scenarios and edge cases without risk to the public. Multiple distinct testing zones allow our customers to validate their AV stack in real-world scenarios with a variety of roadways, speed limits, and features such as railroads, city blocks, construction zones, and tunnels. Infrastructure features include programmable traffic signals, merge lanes, traffic circles, and bike lanes, making Gomentum Station an even more versatile space for closed-course testing. Most recently, our Vehicle to Everything, or V2X Lab, opened for traffic engineers to test their connected technology on our DSRC-enabled signals installed at 5 intersections. We also offer a range of automated vehicle testing services that can scale to the size and needs of your operation, including equipment rental, test plan development, engineering support, and result analysis. Gomentum Station is owned and operated by AAA of Northern California, Nevada, and Utah, and is part of our ongoing commitment to safety on the road by enabling the safe development and deployment of AVs. Whether you're testing commercial trucks, passenger fleets, or connected technology, visit us at gomentumstation.net today to see how we can help you meet your AV testing needs.
Thank you, Christina.
Gomentum Station.
Matt Alfano will be taking the next slide.
Thank you, Jack. Good morning, Chair Arnrich, committee members and staff. My name is Matt Alfano. I'm the Vice President for Mobility Innovation at AAA. Just want to start out and say thank you for allowing me to spend some time to go over some of the interesting things that are happening out at Gomentum and some of the plans we have for the future. To kind of echo on a slide that Jack presented earlier, a little bit about our partnership structure, I get asked the question all the time about why is AAA involved in Gomentum Station? And I think a key piece of that really has to do with we are a true neutral third party. We are focused on member safety, safety for the community, and really creating a level playing field for anyone who wishes to test next generation technologies out at Gomentum. I think we've provided a very key buffer between all of our partners involved here, between Concord, Navy, Parks, the county, CCTA, and the private sector partners that we work with. So it's something that we take very seriously, and I think has provided hopefully a key benefit to CCTA and all the partners involved to really create or sort of help foster this ecosystem so that this facility isn't monopolized by one partner with deep pockets. We have numerous partners out there, partners there on multiple partners out on a daily basis. And we're to the point now where those partners are looking at us and saying, how do we continue this investment going forward in Gomentum? So a little bit about what goes on a daily basis out at the facility. And I think it's key to note that this is not just personal autonomous vehicles that are being tested. We're really focused on creating Gomentum that it is all things around new mobility, whether it has to do with connected vehicles or connected mobility, smarter mobility. Autonomous is a great component of it. But it is more than just, hey, here's my own private vehicle, and I've developed the whole stack myself. It's really focused on, those partners are involved, but it's available to more than just the mega funded entities that are here. And building an ecosystem of suppliers and partners that can help drive the next generation. So yes, there are fully autonomous vehicles out there. We have commercial autonomous trucking that's being tested out there. We have vendors that are working on short distance logistics like pizza delivery. We have testing that is being done on commercially available and what will be in, what is in current model years and what is in next model years ADAS systems. We have partners that are working on components that are in supply chain. We've created an ecosystem where companies that provide test infrastructure. So I think in the video you saw some of the features move in an automated fashion. That's a partner we're working with so that our testing partners have access to it. It includes electric vehicles and ICE-powered vehicles. It's really, it is really focused on sort of the technological aspect therein. Jack mentioned we have a partnership with various universities, and I think collectively we are excited as how this ecosystem is being built going forward. Next slide, please. So while we generally avoid mentioning who is in our partner base to maintain their privacy, we love it when they actually mention Gomentum in forms of media. So you can see on the left, Aurora cites us frequently on their Instagram and Twitter feeds. In this case, they were making use of some of the natural inhabitants of the station to make sure, again, that their truck systems were working. In the middle, we're partnered with Waymo on Let's Talk Self-Driving, and Gomentum was a key piece of that. And if we look out on the right, Velodyne mentions us in their testing. I think what's key here is that Aurora on the left, that's very future and something we look forward to seeing. But Velodyne on the right, that's available today. And those are the parts that you'll see in ADAS safety systems that are on the road. So again, it's not things that are we have to wait decades for. It's things that we can see today. Next slide, please. What we like to track at Gomentum is really how many partners are utilizing the track on a daily basis. And we went back and said, okay, let's see exactly what that utilization was. And back in January of 2020, we would had about 30 reservations in a given month, so one a day. Now we have 8 zones that are available, so that is not, Gomentum fully utilized. Then we hit the shelter in place in March and April of last year, and we shut the track down. Now at that time we were concerned and wondering, okay, when are partners going to come back? Is it going to be September, October? Is it going to be next year? Fortunately, when we were able to open with safety measures in place, they came back, and they came back quickly. And it was a pleasant surprise that they had not abandoned their testing efforts in the pandemic. And we see that, again, we suffered another dip when the second shelter in place was enacted. But really from, again, the beginning of last year through today, our partners are out there frequently. We've had over 500 different individual visitors for testing purposes out there. About 20% of those visitors have been on the site 6 or more times. So this isn't people dropping in for the day and we're never seeing them again. It's people that are there active testing. And what I think it's going to drive is that it's really going to help drive economic development, because as we look to the future, these testing partners they're going to want to staff in Concord. They're going to want to staff locally as opposed to commuting from wherever they are. And there's some things we'll talk about on the next slides to sort of how do we help them get to that phase. But we are, our utilization is great. We just got the August numbers in. They will be higher than they had been in any prior month. And it's an interesting, well, maybe interesting to us. We're actually having to revamp how we do calendaring because the demand is so high. We need to make sure that all our partners are getting equal access. And again, I think that also benefits why, or describes why AAA is sort of involved in this business. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I would like to address the $50 million elephant in the room that Tim Hale has so dutifully reminded me of on a consistent basis since I took over this position. I fully understand, what was communicated to the board when AAA first became involved, and we were working on ways to, in fact, get that investment. And I think it's going to come from a couple of places. Yes, it will come from AAA. I think this year alone, we're spending about $2 million in CapEx improvements alone. And that budget was set last December when we were in shelter in place again, and we had no idea what is going on, what would be going on for 2021. So we're committed to investing CapEx dollars and our operating expense dollars into that facility. I think the way we're looking at it is really in two buckets. The bucket here is things that are normal course and sort of limited investment, and things that we're working with staff and our partners at Concord, Parks, and the county to really make sure that we're meeting our testing partners' needs. So, on the list includes, what seemingly basic things like high-speed internet connectivity. We want to have some more semi-permanent equipment installation. I think the Vita X Lab is a phenomenal example of that. Not only does it benefit CCTA and the public testing partners, but the private testing partners utilize it well. So I think it's a really, it's a terrific example of how we've been able to build an ecosystem and mutually benefit from dollars that are spent there. So we want to increase that and make sure that, we get more semi-permanent components in. For reference, if we move one of the signals, our partners have to remap. So we want to make sure it really creates as much of a permanent environment as possible. Again, we focus on site access improvements all the time. We're working on how do we add drone and testing to the program. And I think, again, working with county partners on how to do that. Things like weekend and night testing, which the city has been very accommodating to. But these are the asks that I think our partners are having just to sort of meet what their current testing needs are. Let's go to the next slide. Now let's talk about the bigger dollar components here. And I think this facility has a tremendous advantage, even in an interim use basis, during the redevelopment, solely because of the size. So 2,100 acres is unheard of to be able to have access to try any of this. Some of the competing solutions, Merced has a 250-acre facility, Altamont, Oval, probably not much more than that. So Gomentum and Concord has a tremendous advantage with just the sheer size of the facility. Now, where we from the private sector would like to be able to invest in Gomentum really has to do with the following list. We're going to need to work with our partners to make sure that we get on-premise storage overnight. That will allow them to not, Aurora to move their truck from Silicon Valley to the test facility every day, which clogs the roads, by the way. It will also force them or sort of encourage them to staff locally. We need to develop individual workspaces and microlabs. Our partners are very secretive, and as much as the firehouse is a great community place, they're going to want to be able to do things, again, in a somewhat private manner. They have asked for, multiple partners have asked for additional infrastructure like a skid pad or a vehicle dynamics area to test their technologies. This will require us working with, again, the city, parks, county, and probably the master developer on how do we think about turning dirt and putting in infrastructure that can be leveraged down the road by whatever the redevelopment project needs. So these things are coming along, and the partners are very interested in helping to fund this as well, because they want to be coming to Concord. They don't want to go to Michigan. They don't want to go to Arizona. They don't want to go to the Central Valley. They want to come here, and they're willing to invest the dollars here. You'll frequently hear high-speed loop. That's on the radar, but we're not going to put that at Gomentum. They've asked for different road conditions, whether it be cracked asphalt, which we have plenty of out at the facility, or even sort of Belgian cobble, pave type shakeout testing. So we're working with them to really turn this from hey, we have a bunch of straight roads, to how does this become a facility in the interim use of the redevelopment where they can meet a vast majority of their testing needs, and our partners are communicating to that as well. Next slide. So what is this going to take between AAA and CCTA? So I would like to say that I think we have a wonderful working relationship. I thoroughly enjoy working with your executive director. I thoroughly enjoy working with staff. We are well aligned on how we can build this together and meet the objectives of all parties involved. I think you'll see us come back at some point to this group or a larger committee about how do we actually unlock these investments and the dollars that are being discussed to deploy into this facility. So again, we're going to need to enhance our offerings, and we're going to need to find the right structures so that that investment is protected. And I think we're looking at it truly in the sense of during the interim period for the redevelopment. So we understand that this is not going to be built for 100 years. We're looking at the next 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, which I think meets well and fits well with what this base will eventually look like. Next slide. It wouldn't be a slide presentation without here are obstacles. So we're going to have to work with the master developer and get in lockstep with them. We're going to have to work with the Navy and even and Concord as to when we can actually start turning dirt on the facility. And in addition, not screw up any of the transfer processes that are going on. We're really sensitive to that. We want to make sure that the timing works for everyone. And even little things like if we can figure out how to do, get drones on site, that would be great. And sort of, I think, further convincing the Navy that we are good stewards of this facility, that it's not going to be robot anarchy, or we're not going to risk any of the safety of the people and or any of the plans that exist on the site. So next slide. And I think I will turn it back to Jack Hall for this portion.
All right, thank you, Matt. So, things are going really well right now with all our partners. We're coordinating with the city of Concord. As most of you might be aware, they've just recently entered into negotiations with a new developer. And so we're working with them on that. Also, East Bay Regional Parks, it's now called the Thorogood Marshall Regional Park. We're working on an agreement. We hope to bring an agreement to us, to CCTA board by the end of the year, and we're working towards that. One of the improvements that they would like to see is Bailey Road, because they own the land to the south of Bailey Road, and that's going to be strictly for hiking, and that they need some improvements in there. Also, there's a building 420 that they would like to see possibly improved for a corporation yard in the future. And then also the Glideways test facility is located on the Park District land. And then actually the real exciting thing is Contra Costa County. We're working with them on, for instance, on drones. Byron Airport is a real possibility. And there's also an existing skid pad at Buchanan Airport. So Gomentum Station is more than just the Concord Naval Weapons Station. We want to expand that throughout the whole county. And then also at the county, we want to create a first responder training center. And because autonomous vehicles and fire and police is a big deal. And we have partnered on an application with Contra Costa Fire. It was not successful, but we have that relationship and we're going to continue to move that forward. Next slide, please. So all these slides, they tie in perfectly to our overall goals of reducing congestion, creating jobs, improving safety, and the economic development is definitely a big part. We also want to create a permanent innovation center, and that could be, there's a lot of different opportunities at the base. It is a huge blank canvas right now. There is a specific plan that Concord has, but we could make it all fit together. And the company that we're working with is Oracle on a possibility of an innovation center, but there's others too. And then, as Matt mentioned, our location near Silicon Valley makes us an ideal facility. Next slide, please. And that actually concludes our presentation, and we'll be happy to answer any questions.
Great, Matt and Jack, thank you so much for that. Let's go to questions first of committee members. Any questions? Tom?
Several times you've talked about drones, and the last slide talked about expansion of the drone program and some connection with Byron Airport. What could you elaborate a little bit on what the connection of drones to Gomentum is?
Sure. So, I mean, sometimes during the course of working, you almost think AVs are obsolete already. I mean, there's flying cars now. I mean, so drones are definitely an innovation that can help congestion on delivery of packages. There's a lot of big upside on drones. And then one of the things too, one of the obstacles at the Gomentum station, the base, specifically on the Park District land, is there's a lot of birds of prey, raptors, and you have to be careful on that. So, I mean, but that actually would be a good test case too. You don't hit an endangered species. But I mean, that's where the drone is. It's innovation and delivery of packages. And then Byron Airport does have a program currently.
Jack, if it's okay if I add on to that, I think one of the key things we've done the past year is really listen to sort of what our partners are interested in. And the county is very interested in this drone program, and it's out at Byron Airport, but no one really knows about it. And I think we have the opportunity to sort of think about Gomentum as more than just autonomous vehicles. It's really about mobility. And if that means sort of wrapping our arms around the program that's out at Byron, great. If it means bringing drones onto Gomentum, okay, we have a lot of convincing in the Navy to do. But I think it's taking the projects that are important to our constituents, particularly in this county, and giving them a bigger stage, wider audience, because I'm a Contra Costa County resident. I'd never heard of the drone program out at Byron until we talked to the county. So this is an example of something that we should say, hey, let's just bring under this umbrella and expand sort of what we think about from a mobility standpoint.
Sorry, other questions? Teresa.
Hi, and I turned my mic on without any reminder. So first of all, Matt and Jack, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm always excited when we get to hear about Gomentum, and got to go out. I actually just in full in full coverage, I work with Supervisor Burgess during the day, who is one of the big advocates, along with Supervisor Mitchoff, who they serve on the committee for the airports, for the testing that is taking place. And there is some going on at Buchanan as well. But as part of my day job, I got to go out and also as chair of the authority, go out and visit the site for the first time in probably 4 to 5 years. And just excited with all of the improvements that have taken place with the partnership between CCTA and AAA. And Matt, I want to thank you for covering a lot of the questions that I had, the elephant in the room, and the plans and the vision going forward. I am curious if AAA has begun to develop in partnership or collaboration with us and with the other partners, East Bay Regional Park, City of Concord, a sort of strategic plan a vision that begins to lay out lots of great ideas and lots of excitement around what partners want. But given the timeline with transfers and the master developer, I'm just curious where we are with the plan.
So thank you for that. We meet with Tim Hale and staff on a weekly basis, and that is one of our standing agenda topics. I think we're working on the formulation of the concrete components of that, but it is something we are keenly aware of, and making sure we're all aligned and that we have the right structures in place so that it gives comfort to, again, Concord and to county and to parks and to the private sector on that. So Tim, I'm not sure if you can jump in on any of this or sort of discuss it, but that is something we're hoping to have move forward the next couple of months, because we're already looking at, again, what's going to happen 10 years from now, and making sure that that's still that the plans we make today would still be would fit the schedule and fit everyone's needs 10 years from now.
Okay, so that is helpful. And one thing that I do want to make sure we always include when we're talking about the partners and priorities is our CCTA's priorities, because I know our partnership is so closely aligned, but I know that we also, in addition to serving the private sector and their testing, requirements and all of that, we have some priorities and commitments as well. So I know that. I just wanted to throw.
No, and it's a great point. I think and I think that's one of the benefits of our engagement. So there's a bus on shoulder project that is, we discuss, and we sort of say, how can that benefit everyone? And so it's not just our goal is not to create discrete testing areas that can't be utilized. So in a bus on shoulder world, it's great. How does that meet CCTA's needs and what they want to do? But also, how does it help our partners that need to test on-ramp and off-ramp in AV? So we do think about that, and we do discuss that. And again, one of the great things about the full transparency that we've had in partnership with staff.
Great.
If I could ask one more question. This may be for Tim or Jack, as well as Matt, but how often are all of the partners meeting? So the city of Concord, the East Bay Regional Park District, because I know, their priorities with getting access to their visitor center and getting the visitor center built and all of those things. How often are we meeting with all the stakeholders?
So I'll take that one. We meet with the city bi-weekly, and we meet with AAA weekly. And then I meet with the park district with AAA. We meet bi-weekly on that. So we don't actually have a meeting with the park district and the city. We did have a meeting yesterday with the U.S. Navy, which was actually a first since I've been involved in the program. And it went very well, in my opinion. The Navy is kind of the one that we don't meet with too often, but the city of Concord invited us to a meeting, and we've set up, I think it's a quarterly meeting with the Navy now.
Thank you.
And this is Tim Hale, the executive director. I mean, the other thing, just to add, we are not meeting regularly with the county right now, but we have been, in close collaboration with them. So I've been talking with the county administrator and also the assistant county administrator almost on a weekly basis, trying to really move forward and making sure that we're aligned on really our goals and priorities as we're starting to kind of think about and negotiate this agreement. And so I think what's, and maybe just to maybe add on what Matt was saying earlier, we do meet weekly. We do talk about a lot of these partnerships and these agreements, on a weekly basis, and making sure that they're moving forward. And I think the important piece is, really making sure that we have, a strategic plan to kind of help inform, what we're going to be doing and entering into these agreements. For example, the East Bay Regional Park District, there's a number of terms that we're talking about with them in terms of the visitor center, capital improvements, the Bailey Road improvements. And so, it's going to be really important to understand, what is going to be, the timing, the commitment, of those investments, from AAA. And I think that's going to be important in terms of as it relates to the strategic plan, and it also relates into these agreements that we're talking about.
Great, thanks, Tim. Sue?
I just wanted to make a comment. We mentioned earlier about when we were talking about State Route 4 about the pressure to do a lot of house building, and a lot of us have talked about how we're putting a lot of pressure on house building, but not the job growth. And I think this is an area that's really exciting and can bring sort of a focus to the area that can bring attract a lot of other related industries and innovation that I think will be fantastic for the county. So I just, the update's been great, and I look forward to taking a tour. But I just wanted to mention that comment.
Great, thanks, Sue. I would just add a few comments. One, it's fantastic to have the update. Obviously, I've been here from when we started this. We talked about it for years, and the opportunity came up, and helped negotiate along with David Trotter when we worked with AAA to come up with this relationship and the agreements. I think what would help all of us and our agency, and I think for Gomentum Station itself, is put pen to paper, get a 10-year plan with the capital commitments, the strategic milestones along there. And, we can always say, well, we're not quite sure what we're going to have 10 years from now. But if you don't put it there, those plans will be modified over time. It's a technology-driven thing, but even the tech companies I'm running, we have plans and they do change. But I think we need to see that. I also think that needs to be worked out closely with our staff at CCTA to make sure we're aligned. We're the master leaseholder. In order for us to go in and get a long-term commitment, we have to have that plan in place as soon as possible. And I think we need to come back to the board, Matt, to have your organization come back here and give us an update twice a year. So we can, talk about those, check in, understand challenges. But I think from my seat, and I think overall from CCTA's point of view, I think having that plan and those real commitments is the only thing that's going to allow us to move forward. And the future is the future, only what we know today. And it's a type of plan that will change as we go on, and that's just the world we live in. So I just hope to see that, and I think making that commitment as we recommend to go forward, and you do the same presentation to the full board. I think it would be helpful to everybody to have some discussions with our staff about that, how it's going to be laid out, what the timeline is, and what those deliverables are, so that I think it will give great strength to our board and confidence that we've got the momentum in Gomentum to keep it going. So anyway, any questions or comments from our public on this? If so, just physically raise your hand and I'll call on you. I can see everybody now. Not seeing anybody. So this isn't really an action item. This is just a touch base. So we will see Jack and Matt back. And Matt, really great to see you. Appreciate your enthusiasm for what's going on out there and all that you're doing. So exciting to see you come back.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you. All right, so this will take us to our last item on the regular agenda portion, which is item 4F, and this is the first amendment to employment agreement with our Executive Director, Tim Hale. And this item will be presented by Terry Ann. Terry Ann, good morning.
Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. I'm essentially just going to read the recommendation for this item out loud. It's an approval of the First Amendment to the Authority's employment agreement with Timothy Hale, the Executive Director, which will adjust his compensation to $286,200 per year effective July 1st, 2021. The term of the amendment will remain through December 27th, 2023. And that concludes my presentation.
Great, thanks, Terry. I love the conciseness. Any questions or comments from commissioners, committee members? Seeing none, are there open public hearing? Any comments or questions from our public? please raise your hand. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing. It's back before the board for a motion.
Oh, I'll do a motion again. Noack. Oh, sorry, Teresa, did you have your hand raised? I just saw you out of the corner of my eyes. She was trying to take over my job today.
We're gonna arm wrestle, but I will second. I will second.
You can flip flop with that if you want. You can do the motion. I'll do the second.
However, Terry Ann wants to write it, but I'm happy to be the second.
So I think officially it was Noack first, second by Gerenzer. Any further discussions or comments? Seeing none. Christina, will you call the roll, please?
Yes, Chair Arnrich,
Yes.
Vice Chair Noack,
Yes.
Member Butt,
Yes.
Member Geringer,
Yes.
Member Thorpe. The motion passes with members present.
Great. Terry Ann, thank you for your assistance on this. Takes us to item number 5, which is correspondence and communications, which you have seen in your packet. Commissioner and staff comments. I do not have any comments at this point. Any commission comments? Seeing none. Executive staff, Tim, any comments?
No comments, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so item number 7. This next item is a closed session of which the committee and staff and our attorney will move into another breakout room. And this is to discuss existing litigation related to CCTA versus East Bay Mud. And that's case number CIVMSC 20-00719, pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9. And after the conclusion of that meeting, we'll come back out and report anything if it needs to be based on any actions that we've taken. With that, Christina, will you move us out to breakout rooms?
I'm going to pause all of the recordings and move you into breakout rooms.
Thank you. Okay, we are back out of closed session and there is no reportable action at this time. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for our APC committee meeting. And this meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Chair Arnrich. Thank you, commissioners. Appreciate it.